Queen loss is one of beekeeping's most stressful events, and it is stressful in a way that compounds across a season with a speed that catches most beekeepers unprepared. The colony goes queenless. The worker population begins an emergency queen rearing response, selecting larvae from whatever open brood was present at the moment of queen loss and building emergency cells from that material. If the timing is wrong, if the larvae available are too old, if the colony's nurse bee population is inadequate, if the emergency cells are constructed during a cold snap, the response fails. The colony dwindles toward a laying worker condition. By the time the beekeeper diagnoses the failure, weeks have passed. The population has aged beyond recovery, and a replacement queen must be sourced, shipped, and introduced into a colony whose reception chemistry has been disrupted by the queenless period. The modern beekeeping industry has built an entire product and service infrastructure around this failure sequence. Purchased queens, introduction cages, acceptance protocols, queen cells shipped overnight, grafting kits for beekeepers who want to produce their own. Amish beekeepers of the 1880s operated outside this infrastructure entirely, not because they were indifferent to queen quality, but because they understood the biology of queen rearing at a practical level that made the purchased infrastructure unnecessary. When a queen was needed, they created the conditions under which the colony would raise an excellent one. No grafting needle, no incubator, no shipping box, no introduction cage. Just a precise set of frame selections, a specific colony configuration, and the biological knowledge of what a queenless colony will do when it is given the right material to work with at the right moment. The biological principle at the center of the Amish queen rearing method is one that modern beekeeping instruction acknowledges in theory, but consistently underemphasizes in practice. The quality of a queen is determined primarily by the age of the larva from which she is reared and the intensity of royal jelly feeding she receives in the first 72 hours of larval development. These two variables, larval age and feeding intensity, are not equally controllable in every colony configuration, and the Amish management approach was built specifically around creating the conditions that maximized both simultaneously. A worker larva can be converted to a queen only during the first 3 to 4 days of its larval life. After day 4, the developmental pathway to queenship closes. A larva selected for queen rearing at 36 hours of age has a significantly longer window of royal jelly exposure ahead of it than one selected at 72 hours. That additional feeding time produces measurably better developed ovarioles, more developed mandibular glands, and a larger overall body mass. The physical characteristics that determine the queen's laying capacity, longevity, and pheromone production. The nurse bee population available to feed the selected larva is the second variable. A queenless colony with a surplus of nurse bees, young bees whose hypopharyngeal glands are fully active and whose brood-tending duties have been temporarily relieved by the removal of competing brood, feeds a selected larva with a consistency and volume of royal jelly that a colony managing a full brood nest alongside emergency queen rearing cannot match. The Amish created this condition deliberately. They did not simply remove the queen and let the colony rear an emergency replacement from whatever larvae happened to be available. They configured the colony, its brood composition, its nurse bee population, its available space, to produce the optimal queen rearing environment before introducing the selected larval material. The practical execution of the Amish queen rearing method followed a sequence that was simple enough to be taught by demonstration rather than written instruction, and precise enough that deviation from the sequence at any step produced measurably inferior results. The method began 2 days before the queen rearing colony was configured, with what the Amish called the cell starter preparation, the identification and isolation of the colony that would be used for queen rearing. This colony was selected not randomly, but by specific criteria: high nurse bee population, low mite load by visible inspection, and a calm handling temperament that suggested genetic qualities worth propagating. A colony selected for queen rearing was effectively being selected as a genetic donor. The nurse bees in this colony would determine the quality of the feeding environment, and the colony's own characteristics would influence the genetics of the queens it raised if the selected larval material came from this same colony's brood. On the morning of the configuration, the selected colony was opened and its frames assessed. All frames containing open larvae younger than 3 days old were identified and set aside in a temporary nucleus box with the nurse bees covering them. This left the queen rearing colony with its capped brood, requiring no active nurse bee feeding, its honey stores, its full nurse bee population now unoccupied by open brood feeding demands, and critically, no queen. The queenless state, combined with the nurse bee surplus, and the absence of competing open brood created the peak royal jelly production environment in which the selected larval frame would be introduced. The selected frame, a single frame containing brood of known age, ideally from the same colony's best recent laying, showing larvae at the youngest visible stage in the cells, was then introduced to the center of the configured colony. The nurse bees, finding themselves queenless, with full hypopharyngeal glands and no competing brood demand, converged on the youngest larvae in the introduced frame and began constructing queen cells with a feeding intensity that the divided attention of a conventional emergency response never produced. The management of the queen cells after their construction was the stage at which the most common errors occurred in historical accounts of this method, and it was the stage the Amish managed with the most disciplined restraint. The primary error was inspection interference, opening the colony repeatedly during the queen cell development period to check on progress, assess cell viability, or count the number of cells being built. This impulse is understandable. A beekeeper who has invested careful preparation in configuring a colony and selecting larvae wants confirmation that the process is proceeding correctly. The biological cost of that confirmation is significant. Every inspection of a queen cell colony during the active development period, days 4 through 14, exposes the developing cells to temperature disruption, physical vibration, and potential damage to the delicate cell structure and its developing occupant. More critically, the nurse bees attending the queen cells respond to the inspection disturbance by temporarily abandoning the cells, interrupting the continuous feeding that is the defining feature of optimal queen development. An inspection that lasts 5 minutes may interrupt royal jelly feeding for 30 to 60 minutes as the nurse bees return to their attendant positions and reestablish their feeding rhythm. Across multiple inspections, these interruptions accumulate into a measurable reduction in the feeding volume that the developing queen receives. The Amish protocol was direct. After the larval frame was introduced, the colony was left entirely undisturbed for 10 to 12 days. Not a brief check, not a quick peek, completely undisturbed. The first opening after introduction occurred on day 10 to 12, early enough to manage the emerging virgin queens before they could destroy each other's cells, late enough that the queen cells were fully formed and the development within them complete. This single discipline, the willingness to leave the colony alone during the critical development window, was the behavioral characteristic that most consistently separated successful Amish queen rearing from the failed attempts of beekeepers who could not resist the inspection impulse. The selection and management of queen cells after the day 12 inspection required the Amish beekeeper to make one decision that the biology would not make on his behalf: how many queens to allow the colony to produce. Left entirely unmanaged, a queenless colony rearing replacement queens will produce multiple cells and allow the first virgin to emerge and systematically destroy the remaining cells, occasionally with the assistance of the workers. This natural process produces one queen, frequently an excellent one, but it also produces a post-emergence period of 10 to 14 days before the virgin is mated and laying, during which the colony's population is aging without replacement brood. In a single colony management scenario, this natural sequence is acceptable. In a managed apiary, where the beekeeper was using the queen-rearing colony to supply queens to multiple splits or nucleus colonies, a different approach was required. The Amish managed multiple queens from a single rearing event by removing individual capped cells on day 12 and introducing each one to a prepared queenless unit, a nucleus colony or a split that had been configured to receive a cell rather than raise its own. Each removed cell was handled with specific care, never chilled, always held in the orientation it occupied on the comb, vertically, with the tip pointing downward as the developing queen expected, and introduced within hours of removal to prevent temperature loss in the cell. The introduction of a capped queen cell to a queenless nucleus required no acceptance protocol because the queenless nucleus had no existing queen to reject the introduction. There was no competing queen pheromone to create rejection chemistry. There was only a queenless colony and a capped cell containing a developing queen that the colony needed. The acceptance was not a management challenge. It was a biological inevitability. The queen that emerged from the Amish rearing process entered a colony whose biological environment had been deliberately managed to produce the highest possible quality of development from the earliest moment of her larval life. But the quality of that queen was not fully expressed until the mating flight sequence was complete. And the mating flight management was the final stage of the Amish method, where a specific environmental understanding produced outcomes that were consistently superior to what unmanaged mating produced. The virgin queen's mating flights occur in the afternoon hours when drone flight activity is at its peak, typically between 1 and 4 o'clock on warm, calm days above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The Amish beekeeper understood the critical importance of the drone population available in the mating area. Not the drones in his own apiary, but the aggregate drone population across the surrounding landscape. An apiary situated in isolation, surrounded by conventional operations that aggressively manage drone populations, produced queens mated to a narrow genetic pool. The Amish apiary, typically situated within a farming community of multiple Amish beekeepers, maintaining colonies year-round, and rarely conducting the aggressive drone brood removal that characterized commercial queen production operations, maintained a high and genetically diverse local drone population year-round. This was not an active management decision for mating. It was the incidental result of a beekeeping philosophy that did not view drone production as waste. Drones cost the colony resources to produce and maintain. The Amish beekeeper did not eliminate them as inefficiencies. He maintained them as infrastructure. The male population whose genetic diversity would be expressed in every queen mated in the surrounding area. The queens that resulted from this mating environment showed the behavioral stability, disease resistance, and production consistency that genetic diversity produces in honeybee populations. And they showed it without any deliberate selection program, without any import of exotic genetics, and without any purchased breeding stock. Just a community of beekeepers who kept their drones and let the biology do what biology does when it is not managed into a narrow commercial bottleneck.